Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining our webinar session, SAT, ACT, or both. My name is Lindsay, and I'm here with our Princeton Review expert, Aaron. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that everyone's lines are on mute. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please use the questions box in your GoToWebinar panel, and we'll save some time at the end to answer all of your questions. Without further ado, I'll pass it back to Aaron to get us started.
All right, thank you, Lindsay. As Lindsay mentioned, my name is Aaron Lind. I am the resident expert here. I'm an SAT and ACT Uber trainer. Because it's an unusual title, Uber trainer means that I train not only teachers, but I also train the trainers. I'm also involved in creating our courses, our syllabi, our books we use in classrooms, the books we sell in the bookstores. I also tutor, I teach. In other words, I spend a lot of time thinking about these tests, the SAT and the ACT, and so I am here to be your expert. And as Lindsay mentioned, if you have any questions, please pop them into that chat box, and at the end, we'll have some time for me to answer those questions. Though hopefully a lot of this seminar will give you some information and then perhaps get you started thinking about things and hopefully answer some of the questions you might already have. So we're going to start with some truths and misconceptions. Then we're going to talk about what's a good score. We're going to walk through a handful of sample problems for both the SAT and the ACT, and then talk about how improving your chances of getting in and how the Princeton Review can help you do that. So, first of all, some truths and misconceptions. So, do these tests measure intelligence? And you can kind of think to yourself, it's a little awkward in the chat box, but these are not intelligence tests. That is definitely false. We will talk about what these tests really test in a few, well, as we go on tonight, but they are definitely not a test of intelligence. Can these tests be used to award aid? Absolutely true. Which means even if you're in a situation where you might be thinking, hey, well, this is the school that I'd love to go to and my score is going to get me in no problem, it doesn't mean that it still might not make some sense for you to spend some time preparing and maybe get some money out of the deal. Do these tests reflect your GPA in high school? Absolutely not. They only reflect what you did in a 3-hour-ish time period on a Saturday morning. Do these tests predict your college GPA? Once again, no. Can these tests be prepared for? Well, I have a job. And so the answer for that is absolutely yes. You can and should prepare for these tests. And then do these tests test what you've learned in high school? And that's a little bit more complicated of a question. There are certainly content on these tests that you've seen in high school. You've learned some math in high school. Hopefully at some point you've discussed things like grammatical rules and how to read a 700-word passage, but these tests don't really test what you've learned in high school. Instead, well, they're standardized. And so what does that mean is that there's lots of different challenges that many students find themselves facing when they deal with the SAT or the ACT as compared to high school exams. So for instance, these tests are a race against the clock. You are given a limited amount of time per section. Oftentimes, for most students, it's not enough time. This is by design. The test creators want you to run out of time. Whereas high school exams, for the most part, your high school teachers are not looking to have you run out of time. They want you to be able to finish the test. The content on standardized tests covers years. For example, on the ACT, you might see questions about matrices and vectors, which most students don't see until their senior year of high school, if not until college. You'll also see questions about fractions, which you probably covered in 3rd or 4th grade. Whereas a high school exam, you're probably only covering the last month, maybe 2 of material max. Tests, once again, stress test alert. These are really high pressure tests, whereas high school exams, they're really just covering what you learned recently. Essay on standardized tests, you have a limited time, 40 minutes on the ACT, 50 minutes on the SAT, whereas high school, hours and perhaps weeks if it's a take-home test. Reading, totally do not have enough time. You must learn how to manage your time well in reading and the standardized tests, as opposed to high school where typically you'll be given, say, a novel to read, and you'll need to read the next 2 chapters by next week. Definitely different time pressure. So writing and English on standardized tests, heavy emphasis on grammar rules. Whereas, yes, your high school teachers care about your use of grammar, but they're typically not testing it directly. Math, once again, tricky, comprised of 4+ years, all or nothing. You either get the question right and get the point, or you don't and you don't. And then high school exams, generally focused on 1 year maximum. You're expected to do your best. Of course, also depending on your teacher, most high school math teachers will even give you partial credit if, for instance, you set up the problem and worked it mostly correct, but then made, say, a silly sign error at the end. High school exams, your teachers will be like, you really should have got that, but you're still going to get partial credit. Standardized tests, no such thing as partial credit because, of course, they are graded by a machine, whereas your high school exams are predominantly graded by a human, aka your teacher. So first-time freshmen, so those of you looking to go to college, what are schools looking at? What are the top factors that they consider? Number 1 is grades. You might be thinking, hey, Aaron's a standardized test expert. He probably is going to say tests. And absolutely not. Grades are the most important factor because grades are actually the best predictor of how well you're going to do in college. High school curriculum is also a big factor. Colleges and universities want to see that you're taking what's called a rigorous course schedule in your high school career. They want to see that you're taking challenging classes, that you're stretching yourself, that you're challenging yourself, because that's going to be more reflective of how you're actually going to do once you actually get to college. In third place come the test scores. The test scores play a role in large part because it's one thing that's going to be consistent from school to school. An Algebra 2 class in your high school might not be the exact same class as the Algebra 2 class in the high school across town. And so colleges and universities are stuck with having a difficult job of comparing different grades and different courses, even if they might be called the same thing. So test scores act as something that's standardized that lets the schools compare students from vastly different places. Other things that are important, well, of course, the GPA, the test scores are considerably important. Moderately important is going to be essays, your writing samples, your teacher and counselor recommendations, your class rank. A general rule is that the smaller the school, the more important things are beyond the GPA and your test scores. So if you're looking at a smaller school, they're more likely to rank subject tests, portfolios, interviews, work experience, or as considerably or moderately important. Large schools, for the most part, are not going to consider those things very important at all, for the simple fact that they have too many applicants. If you're receiving over 80,000 applications a year, which, for instance, University of California at Los Angeles does, they just don't have the time to consider much beyond GPA and your test scores. So when it comes to the SAT or the ACT, colleges do not have any preference. Sometimes you hear rumors of that certain schools really prefer one test over the other, and for the last 7 or so years, that's not been the case. However, the thing to note is that tests are used to grant scholarships. There are many merit scholarships, almost 200, that are tied to SAT and ACT scores, which means that the test scores, once again, can be worth a lot of money for you. So, big question is, of course, the SAT or the ACT, and then the real question is, why not both? Well, why both would be another way to phrase it. So, well, first thing, there's some things that the tests that have that are pretty similar. So over 3 hours of testing time, both tests, once you include the administrative parts, the breaks, it's going to take about 5 hours out of your day. Both tests are limited time per question by design, once again. Both tests are mostly multiple choice. The SAT has some free response math questions, and both the ACT and the SAT have essays, and then of course both test math and reading and grammar. So the ACT, section by section. So both tests, the ACT and the SAT, are always going to be in the same order for as far as the sections are concerned. However, of course, each test has different sections. So ACT starts with English. You have 45 minutes and 75 questions. This is your section that's predominantly about grammar and punctuation rules. Math is 60 minutes for 60 questions. Once again, ACT math, very broad range of content. Everything from material you might not run into until your senior year of high school or beyond, all the way back to things like fractions and multiplying and adding and subtracting. Reading, 35 minutes, 40 questions, 4 passages in reading, 10 questions each. Science, 35 minutes and 40 questions, 6 or 7 passages with between 5 and 8 questions per passage. Now, quick note about ACT Science. The ACT Science section is not at all like school science. Out of those 40 questions, approximately 38 are mostly about, can you read a chart or a graph or a table and find data, make reasonable conclusions, make inferences, and use common sense? The other 2 questions, roughly, will be asking about outside knowledge, but they are not testing really obscure, difficult outside knowledge. Instead, they're going to be testing questions such as, what is the process that plants use to convert sunlight and carbon dioxide into oxygen and energy? Of course, this answer is photosynthesis. This is a question that has appeared on the ACT in the last year. So the writing on the ACT, as we're going to see also on the SAT, is last, and it is optional, and we'll discuss what we really mean by optional in a few minutes. 40 minutes for one essay question where you're asked to give your opinion, your position on a question of societal or cultural importance. So total time with the essay, 3 hours, 35 minutes. Once again, this does not include breaks. This does not include any administrative time at the beginning of the test. 215 questions, 216 if you count the essay. So the next test, the SAT, starts with reading. You have 65 minutes for 52 questions, 5 passages with 10 or 11 questions each. One thing to note about the reading on the SAT is that at least one passage will include a chart or a graph or a table. You might be looking here and noticing, hey, there's no science test on the SAT. Well, the way they do that is that they don't really do it separately. They instead incorporate chart and graph reading into every section. Additionally, the reading on the SAT will include at least one passage from before 1900, whereas ACT passages tend to be all written within the last 5 years. The second section on the SAT, writing and language, this is the grammar section. 35 minutes, 44 questions broken up into 4 passages with 11 questions each. Very similar to the ACT English. Punctuation and grammar being tested. SAT tends to test a little bit more heavily questions about making the writing better, choosing correct transitions, choosing introduction or conclusion sentences, otherwise very similar to English. There are 2 math sections on the SAT, one with no calculator, one with a calculator permitted. So section 3, the no calculator section, 25 minutes, 20 questions. Those 20 questions are 15 multiple choice questions and 5 what are known as grid-in questions or student created response, where you can input a number. The math no calculator section is predominantly algebra. The calculator section, 55 minutes, 38 questions, 30 questions, multiple choice, 8 grid-in. This section is still approximately half algebra, and the other half is what they call problem solving and data analysis, which is things like probability, percentages, fractions, proportions. In other words, a lot of that middle school math that the ACT also tests. Essay, once again, is optional, 50 minutes for one essay question. The SAT essay is what's known as a rhetorical analysis. you are given a work, an essay, a speech, and you are asked to describe how does the author or the speech giver create his or her arguments. You are not asked whether or not you agree with what that author or that speech giver is saying. So the total time of the essay, 3 hours, 50 minutes. Once again, this does not include breaks. This does not include administrative time for 154 questions, 155 if you include the essay. So what about the essay? So as I was saying previously, it's optional, but there are some schools that require it. However, there are now fewer than 30 schools that require the essay. This has been a change in the last few years. If you look only a couple years ago, the number was over 100. So we're seeing fewer and fewer schools require the essay. For example, Harvard is no longer requiring the essay, starting with the class of 2023. So if you're planning on applying to Harvard this fall, entering starting in September 2019, you will not require the essay. So our recommendation is that you take the essay so you're not cutting out those schools that require the essay, but don't sweat it. It's not going to be required for most of the schools you'll be applying to, and even for those schools that require it, not necessarily weighed all that heavily. So the scoring, the SAT, you get 2 scores from 200 through 800 with a total score of 400 to 1600. So if you ask one of your friends, hey, what did you get on the SAT? The number they're going to tell you is that 400 to 1600 score, which is a sum of the math and the reading and writing scores. The ACT, you get 4 scores of 1 to 36 in English, math, reading, and science. And those are averaged to give you your composite score of 1 to 36. Once again, if you ask one of your friends, hey, what did you get on the ACT? The number they'll tell you will be that composite. Note that in neither test, the essay is included. The essay is scored separately on a separate scoring scale. So when it comes to which test, once again, which test to take, why not both? Our recommendation is to consider taking both. Why? Because it's becoming something that schools are looking for. We have a quote here from Princeton University's Dean of Admissions. What do they say? Well, for us, more information is always better. If students choose one or the other, that's fine because both tests have value. But if they submit both, that generally gives us a little bit more information. In other words, this might be a way to put yourself separate from everyone else that's applying and show off a little bit more there, give the school a little bit more information. So we have our guidance counselor at Richwoods High School in Illinois. The mantra from college admissions counselors has been increasingly to advise students to take both. So this is definitely something you want to strongly consider. Planning on and taking both the SAT and the ACT. There are some differences, but there's a lot of similarities. And as you can see, it might be helpful when it comes to applying to college. So what we need to do is we need to create a testing plan. What you don't want to do is wake up one day in the summer before your senior year and say, oh yeah, I should probably take the SAT and the ACT, and then sign up for it, and then the next thing you do is you just show up. Once again, these are tests that can be prepared for and that should be prepared for, and that's going to take a bit of time. So you want to start early. If you are a sophomore, junior, freshman out there, awesome. If you're a rising senior, your job this summer is absolutely going to be to figure out when are you taking the SAT and the ACT and how are you going to prepare. Choosing a test. There are a variety of things you can do to choose a test. The Princeton Review has a quiz, SAT, ACT, or both, that you can go to our website and take. We also offer practice tests. You can take practice tests of each test through our website. We often also offer these locally. So if you have a local Princeton Review office, you can get in contact with us. As you can see, we have our phone number at the bottom of the page and our website. Either go through either channel, see if there's a practice test being offered near you. Focus on one test. Okay, once you've decided which test am I going to focus on, let's focus on that test. Take your first test, get that score, and then adjust your testing plan as needed. So depending on how that first test goes, maybe you choose to rewrite that test. Maybe you're going to choose to switch to the other test. Once again, it's going to depend on what your plan is, but this all goes back to starting earlier. The earlier you start, the more options you'll have, the more flexibility you will have, and the better off you'll be in the long run. So, what's a good score? Give everybody a moment to think about, what is a good score? And so, everybody thinking about that, what's a good score? Well, here's what I'm going to tell you. The good score is the score that gets you into the school that you're aiming for. And so this is a chart of a handful of schools that, and giving their self-reported average scores from each of these schools. And so notice that depending on the school you're looking at, what a good score is might vary. The other thing to keep in mind is that these are average scores. You will find students at all these institutions who will have scores higher, but you'll also find students at these institutions that have scores lower than the average. That's what an average means. And so certainly the higher you score, the better off you're going to be, the better your chances. But there's still a possibility of getting into some of those schools if you have a good enough score and something else that makes you particularly special that helps you show off to the admissions committee. So there's a lot involved. Once again, test scores are important, but grades are important. Your application's important, your essays, your letters of recommendation. And so visit our website once again, princetonreview.com. In this case, princetonreview.com/journey to help you maximize your scores, but also help you with your school search, find your dream college, and give you some guidance as to what steps you should be taking when to be in the best position possible to get into that school of your dreams. So getting back to the SAT and the ACT, once again, yes, there's gonna be some knowledge required, ideally some stuff that you've learned in school, maybe some things you haven't, and we can teach you those things. But more importantly, these tests require test-taking savvy. So for instance, you can't unfortunately be like Hope here, who naming the quadrilateral, Bob and Harry and Kate and Edison, not obviously not what these tests are looking for. And when you're asked to find X, once again, the machine doesn't care, not going to be impressed by your ability to circle it and say, here it is. And so for a couple things that might be more relevant to these tests, first thing I'd like you to do is pick a number. Take a moment, close your eyes or open your eyes, whatever, pick a number. And so now, most, if not all of you, chose an integer, a whole number. You chose a positive number. Very few of you would have chosen a fraction or a negative number or something irrational like the square root of 3, or maybe an imaginary number like the square root of -2. And so people are predictable. People are predictable in other ways. Think about the color of the screen. It's white. What do cows drink? Now, most of you probably thought, cows drink milk. But do cows drink milk? Or do cows drink water and then produce milk? But calves drink milk, but cows drink water. And so, okay, obviously, well, the SAT won't ask you what do cows drink. The ACT might in the science section, but that seems like a little bit unlikely. What's really going to happen is that the test writers expect you to be predictable. People are predictable, especially when people are put into a time-constrained, high-stress environment, such as a standardized test. And so they create questions in such a way to play on that. So for example, if a store raises the price of an item by 20% and then decreases the new price by 15%, what was the percent change in the price of the item? And of course, most of you are saying, well, of course, it went up by 5%. And you would have gotten the question wrong because it actually went up by 2% because the new price, 15% of the new price is going to be a bigger number than, it's not going to be a bigger number, but it's going to be more than 15% of the original price. And so you end up with a different result. You end up with a 2% increase at the end of the day, not a 5% increase. And so, well, what are some common mistakes that students make on these tests? So first of all, answering questions too quickly. Once again, the tests are designed so that they're difficult to finish. And so most students will actually score better, score more by slowing down and aiming for accuracy. You do not need to answer every question, and by answer every question, I mean actively work every question in order to get a great score on these tests. And for most students, answering fewer questions and focusing on accuracy is actually going to give them a higher score. So don't fall to the trap of thinking you must answer and spend time on every question. You will probably score higher by focusing on the half of the questions or the 2/3 of the questions or the 3/4 of the questions that you know you can get right, and then guessing the remaining questions because there's no guessing penalty in either the SAT or the ACT. So careless answers. One of the favorite tricks of standardized test writers is to give you an answer choice that's a partial answer. The question's asking for the value of x plus 3, but of course there's going to be x as an answer choice. Or the question was asking what the scientists in paragraph 2 believed, and then the answer will be what the author of the passage believed, not those scientists. Doing work in your head. You are allowed to write on your test booklet. You should be writing on your test booklet, not just in math. Many students go, okay, I'll do the math on the page. You should also be writing in the test booklet in reading, in science, in English, in writing and language. Use your pencil, do your thinking on the page. This is going to avoid careless mistakes. This is going to be more accurate and will also be more efficient. Misreading the problem. Much of the time, these tests are about reading, even in math. Many mistakes start right from the beginning. You misread the problem, and then everything goes wrong from there. If you don't understand what to do, which might be from misreading the problem or misreading the problem too quickly, obviously, if you don't know what to do, you're not going to go in the right direction. You're not going to get the question correct. And so this is all about, once again, test taking strategy. And a lot of this boils back to pacing. So as an example, on the SAT, in math, there are 58 total questions. Your jackrabbit, your average person who thinks, hey, I should do every question, attempts all 58 questions. And because they attempt all 58 questions, they fall into a lot of those common mistakes I just talked about, and they end up getting 26 correct, 32 incorrect, and those 26 correct give them a score of 540 out of 200 through 800. So a savvy student, a strategic student, recognizes that she or he isn't going to do well if she or he does every single question. So instead, the savvy student says, okay, I'm going to attempt 38 questions, and then I'm not going to be perfect. No one's perfect, but I'm going to get like 30 correct. Well, of course, 30 is higher than 26, and so that already gets them a higher score, gives them a 580. Now, and here's one of the big secrets, it's not really a secret, but the test-savvy student doesn't leave the remaining questions blank. Those other 28 questions, well, the 20 questions that, excuse me, the other 20 questions, because they got 8 wrong, they put in guesses. There's no guessing penalty. There's no penalty for wrong answers. And so the test-savvy student still gets another 4 points or so out of that, 34 questions correct, and that student gets a 610. Notice the rabbit student did more questions. That student did more work and got a lower score. So identifying what's going to be the best pace for you, where can you maximize your accuracy, and then rely on the remaining questions giving you a few free points, will absolutely give you a higher score. Similarly, on the ACT, we have 60 questions in math. Once again, rabbit student thinks that she or he needs to do all 60, 30 correct, 30 incorrect, which gives them a 1 to 36 score of 20. The slow and steady student, the test savvy student, once again recognizes that they can do 3/4 of the ACT math in this case, getting 35 correct. And so 10 incorrect, well, okay, so 22. So already, once again, higher than the rabbit student. But out of those 15 guesses, they're still going to get another 3 points, 38 total correct for a 24. Once again, the test savvy student does less work. Once again, not looking for perfection, just looking to be more accurate than they could be if they were doing everything, gets a higher score at the end of the day. And at the end of the day, that's all we care about. We want to get that higher score when it comes to the SAT or the ACT. So now digging a little bit deeper and looking more at some specific problems. Once again, yes, we need to approach the entire tests in a savvy way, but we also need to approach questions in a savvy way. So a big thing on both tests, once again, is that they love to give you words. And so here's an SAT math question. And so the temptation is to read everything all at once and try to shove it all in your brain and then use that to answer the question. Instead, we want to work in bite-sized pieces and figure out what information we need to find. Well, what's going to tell us that? That's going to be the question. The question is actually where you want to start. Starting with that last sentence, which of the following represents Samantha's total cost in dollars for attending N sessions? So we know we're looking for Samantha's total cost. Now we can circle back and look at everything else here and see what's going to give us the total cost. Well, what do we notice? Well, we have our bite-sized pieces. We have a one-time membership fee of $129.99. We have $7 fee per session. And then we have a 13% tax on the membership that's not added to the session price. And so with these bite-sized pieces, we can use another strategy, process of elimination. The question is not asking for us to create an expression for Samantha's total cost. Rather, it's asking us to figure out which of these 4 answer choices is the correct answer. And the best way to do that is by eliminating incorrect answers. So the first question, well, how many times does she pay $129.99? Well, it's a one-time fee. So should that be multiplied by n? Well, no. And so we can get rid of b. And well, what's the tax on? It's on the membership fee, but not the sessional fee. So we need the tax applied to the $129.99, but not the $7 fee. So A has it in the wrong spot. And then, well, the difference between C and D, if we have tax, we don't add tax. We multiply to get that 13% tax. And so we got to get rid of C, and we're left with answer choice D. And so by working it, once again, with the question first, figure out, okay, what do I actually need to know? And then finding the bite-sized pieces and using those bite-sized pieces to work process elimination, we're going to be more accurate because we're going to avoid falling for trap answers. We're also going to be more efficient. We're oftentimes going to be able to answer questions more quickly because we're focused on what's important and not what's not important. Like, do we care that Samantha's joining a judo dojo? Not at all. Totally irrelevant. And so ACT math, we're also going to see questions filled with words. And a technique that we can use that's also applicable to SAT math when we see these variables. Here, Claire is C years old. I don't know about you, but I've never been C years old. And so instead of dealing with this variable, what we can do is say, okay, we're going to turn this into a number. Instead of C, let's say we're going to plug in, and we're going to make Claire 10. So, okay, if Claire is 10 years old and is 6 years younger than Alan, well, if Claire is 10 and she's 6 years younger than Alan, well, Alan's going to have to be 16. Okay, in terms of C is a useless phrase because it's just telling me C is in my answer choices. I know that. I can look at my answer choices and see there's C. Well, what's the question actually asking? How old will Alan be in 3 years? Well, if he's 16 now, well, in 3 years, he's going to be 19. We're going to circle this. This is our target answer because we know when we go to our answer choices, well, once again, they all have those C's in them, but I know C is equal to 10. So I'm going to replace the C's with 10, and look for and eliminate answers that don't give me 19, because 19 is my target. 19 is the answer to the question. So A, C minus 6, well, 10 minus 6 is 4. 10 minus 3 is 7. 10 plus 3 is 13. 10 plus 9 is 19. 10 plus 5 is 15. Well, only answer choice D matches my target answer. So that's going to have to be my answer. Does the ACT want me to do algebra on this question? Absolutely. Do I want to do algebra on this question? No. I don't get points for doing it the hard way. I don't get more points. I only get points for filling in the right bubble. And so knowing strategies such as plugging in that can make these questions easier, more accurate, faster, is going to help you increase your score. And of course, we, the Princeton Review, we're the test prep experts. We can teach you these strategies and make the test easier for you, and not just help you do better on this test. So plugging in this approach, we have to identify the variable. We had to see, hey, that's our variable. Plug in a number for the variable. Here we chose 10. We just want to choose numbers that are going to make math easy for us. We're going to work the steps of the problem. Notice that working the problem here, we didn't do any algebra. No algebra. It was just all arithmetic. If you have any younger siblings, if you have somebody who's in 2nd or 3rd grade and you show them how to do this, they can totally answer this question, because a 3rd grader can totally add 6 to 10 and then 3 to 16. Then once we do that, we've calculated the target value. We want to circle that. And then we're going to go through the answers and eliminate answers that do not match our target value. So process elimination is also going to apply in the verbal sections. So here we have an example of a question that we might see in either the ACT English or in the SAT Writing and Language. And so we see, okay, although some English is a second language, ESL teachers work abroad and speak the language of their host countries. Those working in the United States do not necessarily share a common language with their students. Well, I look at my answer choices and I notice, hey, between countries and those, I see a period, I see a comma, I see a semicolon. Answer choice D even has another comma. And well, hey, I know that the period doesn't work here. The period only works if both parts are complete sentences. And although some English is a second language, ESL teachers work abroad and speak the language of their host countries, it's kind of long, but that word although doesn't makes it an incomplete idea. Similarly, answer choice C, I know that on these tests, a semicolon is the exact same thing as a period. Well, these tests are never going to have two right answers. So if I have two answer choices that are identical, besides that one has a period and the other has a semicolon, I know they're both wrong. And then I look at B and D and I go, well, I don't need a comma after host. That's actually kind of weird. Like their host country. No, not going to work. And so I get rid of those answers and I'm left with the correct answer. Rather than looking for the right answer and talking myself into something that's actually wrong, or maybe missing something that's an even better answer than what I think initially is the right answer, process elimination lets me knock off those answers and narrow it down and be able to figure out the correct answer faster and more accurately than I would just looking for the right answer. So working on a little bit more verbal here, this is now more of an ACT English question. So here, the scientists' work in the field of physics continue to influence the public's understanding of the subject. So I go to my answers, okay, no change, continue, will continue, has the ongoing effect of continuing. So I look at this sentence and I go, well, I mean, I don't like D initially because it seems kind of wordy. It's not very concise, but A is past tense, B is present tense, C is future tense, and all of those seem like they could work. And so one of the big traps that students fall into, both on the ACT English and on SAT Writing and Language, and on both of their respective reading sections, is not considering context. So we can't answer this question based on just the sentence. We got to watch the context. So if we look at the next sentence, his research will redefine a common misconception held by many people. By conducting this experiment, the scientist will become more famous than Albert Einstein. Well, I got a bunch of future tense verbs here. And so I want the future tense. We want to keep it consistent. A lot of grammar rules that you might have learned might seem really confusing. They're really specific and really nitpicky. And one of the keys to doing well, and this is true once again for both ACT English and the SAT Writing and Language, is to simplify. Yes, this is verb tense agreements within the context of a paragraph, but we can just think about consistency. We want to be consistent with what's not underlined. Everything else is in future tense. Let's be in future tense. So, of course, why are you doing this? Why are you sitting here on a Monday evening, or excuse me, Tuesday evening? It is a Tuesday evening, after all. Why are you sitting here watching the seminar about SAT and the ACT or both? Well, of course, because it's all about improving your chances of getting into the school you want to get into. So what else can we do? How can we help you make it your goals? So there's lots of ways to prep. So we can help. So you can take a class. We offer classes online. We also have classes in various places across North America and frankly across the world where you can take a class in person. And so classes are great. They're structured. You're used to learning things in class because you go to school all day. And so for a lot of students, the classroom environment is a perfect fit. It's the way they're used to learning. You'll get the structure, you'll get instructions. You'll not only learn how to do it in class, you'll be told what sort of homework to do. We'll give you practice tests, and the class will prepare you to do well. And once again, we have the classes offered online. We also have classes in person in various places. So you can go to our website, you can give us a call at the phone number at the bottom of the slide, 1-800-2-REVIEW, talk to one of our helpful colleagues in the enrollment center, and we can let you know what your options are for classes. You can also buy prep books. As an Uber trainer, one of my job tasks is to help write books that we sell in the bookstores. We sell practice test books. We have just released 10 practice tests for the SAT. We have 1,471 practice questions for the ACT. We have our cracking series of books, Cracking the SAT, Cracking the ACT. We also have Cracking Premium that teach you how to take the tests. Once again, yes, there's going to be content. We'll teach you the content you need to know, but we're also going to teach you the strategies that you need in order to exceed on these tests. Self-prep online. Let's say, hey, I don't want to just take a class. I don't want something that structured, but I want something more than just reading a book. We offer self-prep courses where you'll receive materials and you'll receive access to our online system. Our online system is not just a bunch of practice questions. We have practice questions, but we also have videos. We have skill building drills. We have a recommendation engine that will take what you get on practice tests and your performance and drills and say, hey, you should be doing this next. And so you'll be guided more than you might think you would get out of a self-prep course. Instead, we use all of our experience with these tests to teach our systems to help you figure out the best way to go about this. Taking a practice test. Once again, this should be the first step. Take a practice test. Once again, we have practice tests available through our website. You can also go onto our website, call our enrollment center, and we can see if you have any practice tests available locally. But take a practice test, start off, figure out where you're at. Finally, working with a tutor. Once again, you can work either in person or online with a tutor. I tutor online, so if you're interested in working with me, you can contact the enrollment center and say, hey, how was an Aaron seminar? He sounded like a pretty awesome guy. Or if you just want to figure out what other tutors are available, maybe you want somebody locally, maybe you just want to know what your options are, you can work with a tutor, once again, either in person or online. Tutor's going to work with you one-on-one. She or he is going to sit down, look at your school report, come up with a plan, craft a syllabus for you. You'll get the one-on-one attention. You'll focus on what you need to focus on to achieve your goal. The tutor can also work around your schedule. If you're a really busy person, if it's going to be difficult for you to sit down and schedule in, say, a course, it might make more sense to go with a tutor. And once again, our website has more information as well as my colleagues in the call center. So once again, this is more about scores. It's about grades, it's about your scores, about your applications. The Princeton Review can help you with all of these things. We talked a lot about scores, but once again, our website's got a lot of information about other resources that we can provide for you. So I'm gonna ask Lindsay. She was monitoring the chat box as we were going on and see what sort of questions we have
Yeah,
coming from the audience.
thanks,
Hi.
Aaron. We have a few questions coming in. So yeah, if you have any questions, go ahead and type them in either the chat box or the questions box. The first question is, if you get a really high score on the PSAT, would it be better to focus on prepping for the SAT or the ACT for the first time?
So if you get a high score on the PSAT, that does lend some weight to taking the SAT as opposed to the ACT. And there's a couple reasons for this. First of all, the PSAT is very, very similar to the SAT. It's about 13 fewer questions, about 20 fewer minutes, but it's the same sort of questions, the same sort of test format. And if you did well on the PSAT, well, clearly you did pretty well on a test that's very similar to the SAT. So it definitely is a check on the column of let's take the SAT. Another reason that you might want to consider the SAT is that if you qualify for the National Merit Scholarship, so the National Merit Scholarship uses the PSAT you take in your junior year, grade 11, as a qualifying test. If you become a finalist for the National Merit Scholarship, they'll actually ask you to take the SAT. So you'll need to submit an SAT score to get that scholarship. And so, well, if you've already taken the SAT for admissions purposes, that's done. Whereas if you take the ACT, they won't accept the ACT because they have an agreement with College Board. So that'd be another reason to do that. Now, I would still recommend at least taking a practice test for the ACT. Maybe you're even better at the ACT. So I wouldn't discount the ACT altogether, but certainly there's a lot of reasons. There's at least two big ones that if you do well in the PSAT would be a reason to consider the SAT rather than the ACT.
Great. The next question is, if you get a significantly higher score on one test over the other, is it still best to send both your ACT and SAT score to colleges?
That's going to really depend on the college's policies. So every college has different policies as to what scores you want to send, what we're supposed to send. Some schools are just going to say, send your best scores. In which case, well, it's pretty clear. Send the score you did well on and don't send the score you didn't do well on. There are some schools that do ask that students submit all their test scores. And so certainly the question might come up is like, well, how would they know if I don't send my score? Well, sometimes, for instance, if your SAT is your lower score, but you needed subject tests, and there's only SAT subject tests, not ACT subject tests, and you need to send those, College Board might let them know that you took the SAT. And so you do want to follow whatever that college's test score policy is. So you want to do some research. Certainly the ideal is that you have awesome test scores on both, which once again goes back to the idea of let's take a practice test of each test, figure out which one I'm going to be doing. If I'm going to be doing both, let's figure out how I'm going to prepare for and nail both. But do your research. Most schools, you can just send your best score, and that's all that matters. Just send your high score. But those schools that want you to submit all of the scores, you're going to be looking at doing that.
Great. Aaron, it looks like we have a pretty shy group tonight. No other questions, so let's give it 1 minute to see if any other questions come through the chat box. I'll remind the group that if you have questions at a later date, if you're laying in bed tonight thinking about the SAT or ACT and you didn't get your question answered, you can always email questions@review.com and we will respond to you via email. Here's a question. If you're an upcoming senior and it's summer, do you recommend taking the time to prepare for both the ACT and SAT, or just focusing on one because there's not a lot of time left?
If you're a rising senior, the recommendation is definitely to pick one test and focus on that. Unfortunately, as you said, the time is limited. And so if you're a rising senior and you haven't done either test, my recommendation is if classes are already done or if school ends in the next week or whatever, give yourself a day or two off and then take a practice test of both. You really want to get on it and you want to get on it now. Take advantage of your summer to prepare. Both tests have recently introduced summer administrations. So for instance, you can take the ACT in late July, which if you decide to, as a rising senior, to take the ACT, is a really good idea because it gives you an opportunity to retake it in September if you need to, or October, instead of waiting until then. Similarly, the SAT now has a late August date, and so you can spend the summer and be prepared before school really gets started and be able to nail the test in August, but that means you need to get started now. So definitely choose one test, do a practice test of both, figure out which one's going to be the better fit for you, and then get working on it right away and nail it. Certainly if you're not a rising senior, if you're going to be a junior or a sophomore in the fall, you have more time to plan, but still sit down and plan now. When are you not going to be busy? When are you going to have the time to put into these tests? And in my experience as a teacher and a tutor, most successful students usually spend around 2 to 3 months. Obviously not 8 hours a day every day, because you're balancing school and extracurriculars and everything else going on in your lives, but planning about 2 to 3 months where a decent amount of time is going to be spent focusing on the SAT or the ACT.
Great. Would you recommend taking a SAT subject test?
SAT subject tests are really only going to be considered by schools that require the SAT subject tests, which means it actually gets back to the idea of research. Schools that require subject tests do tend to weigh them fairly heavily. And there are specific programs that are going to require specific subject tests. For instance, if you're interested in the Wharton School of Business at University of Pennsylvania, they require their students to take the Math Level 2. If you're interested in the direct entry medical program at Northwestern University, they require that everyone take chemistry and Math Level 2. And so do your research. If the schools require it, you need it. If the schools recommend it, my advice is anytime they say recommended, treat it as required. If they recommend the subject tests, in your mind, you should say these are required. I have to take them. They're really only going to be recommended if you're, for instance, a recruited athlete, or you're an entrepreneur, you have something really super special, and so you don't need this. But if you're the student who's really getting in on your academics and your application and your essay, you really want to have that. And when it comes to the subject tests, keep in mind that the percentiles, we didn't really talk about percentiles tonight. The percentiles are kind of skewed because not everyone takes subject tests. There's only roughly 5% of schools that require them for anyone. So not everyone takes them. So the percentiles are kind of skewed, but do your research. If the school requires it or recommends it, take them. If they do not, if none of your schools require them, don't bother, because schools that don't require them don't have other candidates to compare those scores to, and so they're not going to consider them.
Great. We had a question come in. If we have any more questions that come up later, where can you contact someone at the Princeton Review? So if you have questions related to this webinar specifically, feel free to email us at questions@review.com. If you want to talk to someone about potential prep options, you can call us at 800-2-REVIEW. And it looks like Aaron's writing out that email address. So yeah, questions@review.com. Oh. And that was our last question. I'll let you know that this webinar was recorded. So we'll be posting that, we'll be posting the recording at our website, princetonreview.com, and you can find that at princetonreview.com/webinars. In fact, you can find all of our previous webinars at princetonreview.com/webinars. There's a lot of great content there. But with that, thanks so much for joining and have a great night.
Yep, thank you all very much, and absolutely have a great night.
Good luck on those exams.